are being persecuted, prosecuted, and imprisoned, including any anti-war expression by journalists, by human rights defenders, or common citizens who are using the internet to comment on the ongoing, for a 4th-year, war against Ukraine. Along with the foreign agent and undesirable organization laws, national security provisions are used as systematic tools of repression, combining stigma, penalties, and isolation. Human rights defenders, journalists, lawyers, and political opponents are systematically prosecuted, tortured, and silenced. Anti-war dissenters and activists are serving years in prison, not for crimes, but for courage. Political prisoners face not only lengthy imprisonment, but also denial of medical care. Solitary confinement is used against them, prolonged one. Navalny spent 396 days in solitary confinement as a punishment. Punitive psychiatry has returned as a tool against anti-war voices. 51 people forcibly subjected to psychiatric measures for their activism since 2022. Journalist Maria Ponomarenko, for example, was ordered to undergo compulsory psychiatric treatment for maintaining her anti-war stance even in prison. Crushing civil society and journalism continues and escalating. 1,040 individuals and organizations are now labeled as foreign agents, stripped of income, banned from providing education, and isolated. 245 organizations have been banned as undesirable, including the indigenous fund Batani, punished for engaging with UN mechanisms in reprisals against Russian civil society for engaging with the human rights mechanisms of the UN. Russia is the 3rd largest jailer of journalists worldwide. 50 are currently behind bars, some on espionage and treason charges. Out of them, 29 Ukrainian reporters. Journalist Olga Komleva was sentenced to 12 years for reporting on protests and the war against Ukraine. 4 other journalists received 5.5 years prison sentences simply for reporting on Navalny's foundation. Exiled Sakharov Center director Sergei Lukashevsky was sentenced in absentia to 8 years on accusations of spreading fake news about war crimes perpetrated by the Russian army. And by the way, where the banned now and destroyed Sakharov Center in Moscow, just recently, last month, in the metro station was erected a monument of Stalin with the children. Well, the Sakharov Center is now in exile, and its human rights leaders. Historian Yuri Dmitriev is serving 15 years while denied cancer treatment in detention, his health rapidly deteriorating, and this is the person who exposed one of the mass graves of the Stalinist repression, and then he received 15 years imprisonment for that. Because now the historical memory is being attacked by the government while distorting the historical truth about Stalinist and Soviet-era crimes, rewriting history. Extremism, terrorism-related charges, and nationalism is weaponized. Over 150 children are now branded extremists or terrorists, some tortured into confessions. Human rights defender Sergei Davidis was sentenced in absentia on accusations of justifying terrorism, following memorial recognizing detained Ukrainian Azov battalion members as political prisoners, just as a punishment. 85-year-old human rights defender Mark Cooperman was convicted of accusations of inciting terrorism and fined 500,000 rubles for his anti-war views and human rights work. He was facing more than 20 years imprisonment. Thank God for the publicity we gave to this case put the spotlight, he was just fined. An old human rights defender of the Soviet era, who is also who has a disability, and nevertheless, he's 85. He was facing 20 years and over imprisonment. Extremism laws are applied to Navalny's supporters, lawyers, and even journalists covering his work, even people who went to his funeral. LGBT people are criminalized under extremism designations. In 2024 alone, 13 cases were opened, and in 25 publishing houses were raided over LGBT-themed books. This includes the removal of art books and literature that reference LGBT experiences, including books by prominent, I would say, world writers Susan Sontag and Olivia Lang. They're banned. State-sponsored nationalism fuels discrimination and violence against women, LGBT communities, indigenous peoples, migrants, and minorities. And now, counter-terrorism and extremism laws are abused to punish speech, not danger. Former Deputy Alexei Gorinov's sentence for justifying terrorism was upheld in 25 for condemning the killing of Ukrainian children. Novelist Boris Akunin, who is present with us today in Geneva, and you will hear from several of these people at the special side event. Poland and Benelux and 39 other member states are holding at 1 o'clock, between 1 and 3 today at room 11. So Boris Akunin will be there, along with Nobel Prize laureate for literature, writer Svetlana Alexievich, whose books are banned from the school curriculum in Russia, and 2 journalists. One is Russian, Alsu Kurmasheva, who spent 9 months in detention. She was only released last August in the unprecedented prisoner swap. And a Ukrainian journalist from Radio Free Europe from occupied Crimea, who spent 4 years in prison on fabricated charges of espionage after being tortured to confess. He's also here with us today, and this event will be kindly moderated by the BBC Geneva correspondent Imogen Folks. So please come. It's open to journalists. Lawyers defending opposition figures are themselves prosecuted and imprisoned. 3 of Navalny's lawyers were sentenced on extremism-related charges in January 2025. Kaliningrad lawyer Maria Bonsler was detained on spurious charges of confidential cooperation with an enemy state, with a foreign state, facing up to 8 years in prison simply for defending politically targeted clients. The Russian ministry, and now about the war and the aggression abroad. As you know, I have always, from the very beginning of this mandate, stressed that there is inseparable link between the repression inside Russia and the aggression abroad, the ongoing war against Ukraine. These are 2 processes that are intimately connected. The Russian Ministry of Defense has enlisted foreign nationals now to fight in Ukraine, including trafficked persons from Nepal and Sri Lanka into the Russian army, coercing them into signing contracts through torture and threats to their lives and to their families. Following the legislative amendments in 2024, criminal suspects, accused persons and convicts, convicted prisoners, can have their sentences commuted or prosecutions dropped if they sign military contracts to fight in the war against Ukraine. In September 24, for example, a cannibal convicted to 25 years imprisonment was freed after fighting in the war against Ukraine and exonerated. Over 1,600, but maybe many more thousands, we don't know, Ukrainian civilians remain detained by Russian forces, majority of them deported to the Russian Federation and kept incommunicado in Russian prisons, with testimonies of torture, rape and killings in custody. Ukrainian detainees are being starved, tortured with electric shocks, raped and even tortured by doctors and medical personnel. At least 206 Ukrainian prisoners of war have died in Russian captivity, their bodies showing signs of torture. More than 19,000, and we don't know how many really, this is what the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainian government is saying, and the families of these children have 19,000 Ukrainian children have been forcibly deported. Fewer than 400 have been returned back to Ukraine. And now one of the kind of difficult to document, but the newest finding in this report, doctors and medical staff, Russian, have been directly involved or complicit in torture of Ukrainian detainees. I have documented this gruesome pattern firsthand by interviewing a number of former Ukrainian detainees who suffered torture in Russian detention, both civilian and prisoners of war. Ukrainian journalist Victoria Roshina was killed in Russian detention. Her body showed clear marks of torture and was returned to Ukraine only after 6 months in a body bag marked unidentified male with missing body parts. Civilian detainee Natalia Vlasova testified she was tortured by electric shocks, repeatedly gang raped by 15 armed men, and had her teeth filed down with a metal file. Yet the court ignored her torture and sentenced her to 18 years and 2 months in prison on terrorism-related charges. Irina Danilovich, another Ukrainian civilian detainee, a medical professional and a journalist, a citizen journalist, abducted in 22 from Crimea, occupied Crimea, is now in prison for 7 years, denied medical care despite severe pain and risk of long-term harm. And these civilian detainees, women and men, are rarely returned through the prisoners of war exchanges between Russia and Ukraine. Very limited amount of them have ever returned because there is no mechanism for that. And now call for action. I will be calling today to the member states, of course to the Russian Federation, but also to the member states of the international community. It's clear that justice inside Russia is unattainable. Perpetrators enjoy total impunity. The international community must use universal jurisdiction and international mechanisms to prosecute torture and other serious crimes in their countries. Support for independent media, human rights defenders and civil society inside and in exile is urgently needed, including safe relocation and protection from refoulement. Recently, 50 Russian asylum seekers from the United States were deported back to Moscow. They were waited by the security services, many of them tortured, questioned, and then they're all in detention. Create an official and effective international mechanisms for the immediate and unconditional return of all deported Ukrainian civilians held in detention in the Russian Federation, including the deported children, regardless of the status and outcome of any peace talks, with due involvement of the International Committee of the Red Cross. I think this point is extremely important because regardless of the peace talks, the Ukrainian civilian detainees who are held without charges, without trial, might not return back to Ukraine. Similarly, all Russian political prisoners have to be released. And the Ukrainian and Russian civil society, as you probably know, unprecedentedly are running already, I think, for the whole year in 2025, a joint campaign called People First. And they will be advocating at a close briefing for member states again on the 24th, together, the Russian Memorial and the Ukrainian Center for Civil Liberties. They will be advocating for both the release of the Ukrainian civilian detainees, but also the release of the Russian political prisoners who are in prison for the only crime of voicing their opposition against the war against Ukraine. I'm sorry it might be longer, but at least I outlined to you the main points of the report. I hope you have the report in front of you. I'm ready for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. The Special Rapporteur will now take questions. We'll start with journalists in the room, and then we'll move on to those online. Please state your name and organization before asking.